it's easy to add complexity because it's easy to bolt stuff on. We're going to start here and then bolt on and do more. And like it makes sense as you think about it. But with these big implementations, as an example, it's like adding more complexity is actually not the right thing to do. You really need to be focused on trying to like simplify. Like that's actually the hardest thing to do is to take the complex and to simplify it. And so when I was thinking about this idea of like making the RevOps team, like they're serving their customer and they're like they're adding value through automation. It's not just like automating the entire process, it's finding like the right pieces to automate because you always still want the humans to be involved.
You're listening to RevOps Champions, a podcast created for B2B leaders to help you align your people, streamline your processes, trust your data, and leverage technology in order to grow your business. We're your hosts, Brendan Denewell, CEO and co-founder of Dynamico,
and Amy Weaver, Dynamico's marketing director. Today, we're talking with another former HubSpotter, Greg Brown, who is now the Regional VP of Commercial Sales at Impact.com. Greg shares a few lessons he's learned throughout his career in sales, including best practices for implementing new technology and the key attributes of teams who are able to scale successfully. Thinking back to some of your previous roles, what separated teams where things were like very harmonious and you're a well-oiled machine from the ones where you're like, oh, something's broken?
Yeah, so the best performing teams where this all worked well, they had a North Star. So like everyone knew what the mission was, whether it was sales, CS, marketing, or a combination of them all. Everyone knew what we were kind of like marching towards. All the teams were very data driven. And every kind of member of the team, whether it was the leader, the manager, the individual contributor, was also fairly data driven. You didn't need everybody at the highest level, but everyone needed to at least understand conceptually what they were looking at, how to interpret it, why the data was important. I think another thing that has grown on me over time is just like how important the RevOps team is and their kind of perspective and what they add value to. And so this idea of like they are focused on enabling their customers, meaning the folks inside the business. Because I think all too often with smaller teams, as they're scaling up, like the RevOps team is just this, they're like almost like a jack of all trades. They're the fix-it guys or gals, like they're the people you call in when you need something done and they jump in and do it. And that works when you're small. But then like as you go from 0 to 100, it's like that you can't do the things the same way. And that ends up breaking and creating a lot more issues internally, right? And then the last piece is just around being great at communication and change management. I think that's definitely something that is underrated in creating kind of a unified team, a cohesive team where things are kind of working harmoniously.
Yeah, it's a recurring theme in these conversations we've been having for sure.
Yeah, because I guess it's for especially a lot of leaders who are investing in these things for the first time. The communication and change management piece, if they've never done it before and they're not aware of the benefits, it often just seems to fall off the list of things that have to be done. And ironically or coincidentally, they're also the two things that really lead to a successful implementation or adoption of any system or processes or anything else. It's one of those things that
Totally.
Business leaders they forget to take time to invest in change management, communication, and then I guess they all fall sort of under the umbrella often of training. So, how are we continuously training the teams to be able to use these tools as processes change, train them on the change in the processes. Yeah, so totally. We definitely, to Amy's point, we've been hearing that as a recurring theme.
I think that's where, like, at HubSpot, we had this, they use the term friction a lot, right? Friction in the flywheel and friction just within the business. And that's where a lot of it comes from on the internal side is, the expectations aren't set, right? The change management, the communication isn't there. And it just creates a lot of these like skinned knees and skinned elbows, these nicks and cuts that take away from things working well together. It feels a lot worse, right? Than more often than not, people are able to get through it, but it's a more painful process that way for sure.
Yeah.
You had some really good insight in steps that you need to go through, sort of best practices for adopting new technology within the team. I think this would be a good opportunity to dig into those. I like the sharing of the vision. Why are we doing this? What does it mean to everyone? And then ongoing through the implementation of it and implementing those processes.
Yeah, totally. It's anytime you're rolling something new out, I've seen it play out This is all learned through experience,
Yeah.
right? So when you don't know what's going on and like, all right, here's the new tool and you're just like, all right, here's the training and we jump in, it's like you miss the kind of broader context as to why this is important for the entire business, right? And for the most successful teams, like everyone's invested in the success of that business. You know, that they got this like North Star. And so it's important to treat them like an owner and to train them and educate them as to like what's actually happening, why are we doing this thing, and then from there being able to set the expectations, give them the here's the tools that we're going to be implementing, or here's the process we're going to be trying out, here are the expectations of that. You know, we're going to provide these trainings for you, right? Make sure that the teams kind of know what to do, how to do it. Make sure that there's a feedback loop. Like we see that all the time where there isn't necessarily a feedback loop. And so AEs, as an example, if you're rolling out a new sales tool, like an issue comes up, a question comes up, and they don't know who to get it back to. So you need to be able to like take that feedback and quickly get it fixed. Recently, I saw someone do it was like a data intelligence or like lead intelligence type of system. And, you know, they rolled it out to everybody. And there were a couple like issues of how like ratings were passed through, right? Or fields that need to be updated or whatever. And it creates all this commotion amongst the actual users. And then without that feedback loop, like they don't know where to go to get this thing fixed. It just creates more noise and more like issues internally. And so having a team in place that actually is going to try it out first, give initial feedback, do it for this use case. When HubSpot did their own, you know, moved off of Salesforce and onto their own HubSpot CRM, I think that was one of like the key learnings that they had implemented. And so like the team that I was on at the time and working with, like we were one of the last folks to move over. And it was because they identified, we're gonna do this in a kind of a staged approach. We're gonna have a pilot team on this segment, you know, this geography with this type of companies, and then slowly grow it out over time because they saw that like the needs for an SMB sales team are different than the needs of an enterprise sales team, that are different than a channel partnership sales team, as an example, and that's different than a customer success team, and so forth. And so being able to take these small iterative approaches made the whole process much smoother.
Right. Well, and then when you have like the hiccups or the little kinks in the process, it's way less painful when it's 8 folks, 10 folks versus your entire organization realizes this at the same time.
The other key thing that gets maybe not as much discussion is just how it helps create a lot of positive momentum behind the change. I think generally speaking, I don't know, maybe I'm off on this, but I feel like a lot of people don't like change. It's scary. It forces
I think you're
them to do
100%
new,
accurate on that.
right? And so like being able to get some wins from the pilot team and publicizing those creates some excitement, right? People are running towards that as opposed to dreading having to go through that. And so definitely having kind of a pilot team can ease a bunch of like the initial errors, but also build that kind of positive momentum. And then you pair that with that phased rollout and just creates everything much smoother. And then, making sure there's just like a clear process for training and like asking the questions and logging the tickets and providing that feedback. The one thing I think that's most companies, I would say, miss at this point is visibility into the team or the person that submits the ticket.
Okay.
Because that can feel like if you're an AE and you like in the example of the lead intelligence is like, submit this ticket or send an email to this person or send this Slack, you know, into this channel, and then it just goes off into the ether. And you have no idea where it stands.
Am I going to get an answer in a week? Is it going to be a month? What do I do in the meantime?
Right. Meanwhile, the person on the other end, like they're probably collecting a bunch of these things, and they have to figure out how to best manage their time and prioritize what they're doing. And sure, you, AE, with this one outlying issue, like feels really painful to you, but like that might not be the biggest, most important thing to fix, right? Like there might be a whole bunch of other stuff, but if the AE doesn't have that visibility, then like they don't know, and they just get frustrated, and then that causes more pain, right? So I don't think that the RevOps team or whoever's doing or the engineering team, whoever needs to like share status updates like in real time, but you know, I think a more consistent like feedback process is certainly helpful and keeps the end users like, okay, we know a fix is coming. I know where this ranks in the priority, and now I can go on about the rest of my day and duties.
Well, that's very aligned with your idea of the go-to-market teams being internal customers of the organization. That is a way that I haven't looked at it before. So you kind of alluded to this, but you would say the RevOps team is kind of supporting them.
Yeah. At least in my experience, that's what it is the RevOps team. It's kind of a collection of superheroes, really, because you've got folks that are experts in managing the systems, managing the data, doing all the setup and implementation. Like RevOps is kind of all encompassing. And then I found that most departments, so there's like a sales ops, a marketing ops, a success ops, right? And that kind of all gets lumped in under that RevOps umbrella. So each person has their own kind of like specialties. But yeah, those are like the folks that enable the go-to-market team to do their best work.
Totally. Greg, so yeah, I just wanted to sort of come back quick to the concept of doing pilot implementations or rollouts of any new implementation. And that was something that we also learned the hard way whenever it was 6 or 7 years ago when we did the first full stack implementation across marketing, sales, and service. And we started working with larger teams where, if a team, whether the team was 200 or 300 or 400 people that eventually had to be using these tools and systems, we very, very quickly realized that, we needed to do a pilot, whether it was, 10 people or 20 people. And of course, the most effective way to do that, we learned very quickly, was you ask for volunteers. So you say, well, we're piloting this super cool new thing. We're looking for 20 volunteers to pilot this. And then on the sales team, that works typically really well because they're competitive and they want to have access to these things first.
Sure.
It actually takes out the whole issue of if you tell the entire sales team of 100 folks that they now need to use this new tool, there's a lot of resistance. But if you ask 20 of them to put their hand up and say, who'd like to be the pilot, you'll have half the people will volunteer. Obviously, you still got to choose 20. Then you iron out all the kinks, through that first pilot group. And then the rollout to the other 80 folks is that much easier and more successful. And you have a lot less of the friction that you alluded to earlier. So, and in relation to whether you're doing that, whether you're managing that all internally or you have an external partner that's sort of helping you through that process, which of course is what we do a lot, I think it's the same approach, right? Where what is the end goal? What does that sort of ideal future state look like? And then how do we step it out in a way that we get there relatively quickly, but removing all the potential friction that could happen in the process.
Totally. Yeah, to your point, I don't think it matters whether they're using a firm like yours, Dynamico, or it's an in-house team or whatever. It's like the process, the steps are going to be the same. And either way, it requires leadership's buy-in and communication at the highest level to set the table and set the stage for what's going to happen. Make sure that the teams are in place to provide the feedback, right? And that that they've allocated the right resources, frankly, to make sure this thing goes off smoothly. Sometimes businesses start with the best intentions, but then other things come up and they get distracted, and it's like, this is still working. We're still doing this implementation, but their attention is elsewhere. And so they need to figure out how to kind of maintain some level of focus on seeing the project through to completion.
Yeah. And I think sort of going back to what we were talking about earlier about the importance of communication, whether we pull in the change management and training component or not, I think just leave that out for now. But when it comes to communication, there's just this gap in the way that humans naturally think, where you just assume that people know what you're thinking, which of course is a problem. But the other thing I think that we see a lot of, and this is obviously tied back to this whole shiny object syndrome that is, again, notorious. And that is the time that it realistically takes to do these things successfully and how they can fail if you don't invest enough time. And again, a lot of that time, coincidentally, is the time that it takes to train and communicate to essentially reach the adoption that you need. And especially if you're doing a pilot and then rolling it out to an entire team, that just adds to the timeline to the point where we're right up front. As soon as we start talking to a prospective client, we're already talking about what a 3-year roadmap looks like, because we know that a lot is going to have to happen and change multiple times potentially between the first year, the second year, and the third year. And of course, you're always making progress and getting closer to the. Well, I mean, I like the concept of the North Star, but at the same time, the North Star is something that you don't ever really achieve. It's just something that you're working towards, right?
It's a moving target.
Yeah, you're never going to get there, right? It's just the goal, right? That you're marching towards, right? Yeah, and to the point about the timing of it, and as a smaller team and organization, like it's much faster, right? It's much easier there's an issue, like we need this thing, we plug it in, and everyone's very close to it. But as the organization scales and you now go from, a handful of AEs to hundreds, like you've got a cruise ship on your hands. You can't just like turn this thing on a dime. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I've seen kind of like best in class companies do is that pilot team is also involved in working with like the sales enablement team, as an example, on the trainings. And so they're giving their feedback, because I'm sure each vendor, each platform has got like, here's the training that we would recommend. And then each company's like, that's good, but like we want to make it fit our team and our language. And so the pilot team can be really integral in providing feedback on what to spend more time on, what to spend less time on, explaining the nuances, things like that, in order to make the training just more effective and land better. But again, to your point, it does take time.
Yeah.
When you're that size, like you don't really have that much of a choice. Otherwise, it's going to be a failed implementation, a waste of everyone's time and resources.
Yeah, and I think also what we've seen, working across many different industries, is that taking that sort of engineering approach, which doesn't come natural to all industries, where you're continuously iterating and improving. I think there's a lot of, especially for those of us who aren't digital natives, you don't realize that nothing you do is actually cast in stone or permanent. So to have that mindset of continuous improvement and iteration and failing fast and failing forward, these are all just key things that are so critical today that people of my age or older are at a bit of a disadvantage. And we have to help each other realize that there's a better way to do things.
I thought you were just a shade over 21, Brendan.
Thank you, Greg.
No, it's your point is it's certainly taken. There is this notion of needing to iterate and make timely improvements, which is why you need kind of the feedback loop, right? I think the other thing that you just got me kind of like thinking about is this notion of it's easy to add complexity, because it's easy to bolt stuff on. We're going to start here and then bolt on and do more. And like it makes sense as you think about it. But with these big implementations, as an example, it's like adding more complexity is actually not the right thing to do. You really need to be focused on trying to, simplify. Like that's actually the hardest thing to do, is to take the complex and to simplify it. And so when I was thinking about this idea of like making the RevOps team, like they're serving their customer and they're like building, they're adding value through automation. It's not just like, automating the entire process. It's finding like the right pieces to automate, because you always still want the humans to be involved. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I've just seen it time and time again. It's like, you've got a CRM, you've got a marketing automation tool, you've got your customer data living somewhere else. And it's very easy to like tack on, and get these things bolted together. But and they might even be quote unquote integrated, but like if you're not looking at, if the RevOps team isn't looking at how the teams are using this data and what it enables them to do, not only today, but ideally going forward, then you're just going to end up with a whole like mess essentially. And so fighting that desire to just like bolt stuff on and really be thoughtful about how you're building the systems out is important.
Well, this is a really good segue to your points around implementing something new. So you have the considerations that you need to go through as you're evaluating a new tool. What do we really need to keep top of mind? And you talked about the ROI versus the cost, consolidating platforms, and then the resources that you're going to need to implement it, do the training. Is there an engineering piece to it? So walk us through maybe a time that you had to evaluate a new piece of technology and how you went through those various stages to make sure you were making the right choice.
Yeah, it's interesting. We get hit up all the time, this wave of AI-based tools, right? Everyone's probably getting LinkedIn messages from folks that are building out a platform. For me, being more on like the sales side of the go-to-market function, have sat through a number of demos where folks are wanting to basically, the pitch is like your reps are on the phone and they're having these great conversations, but like that data isn't getting into the CRM. And so we can like help automate a bunch of that stuff for you. And it sounds cool, like having been a rep, and I know the challenges of putting that data into the CRM. Like that is a pain that is felt at the IC level, and the lack of the data hurts the rest of the org, right? Reviewing the actual like ROI on that one particular piece, at least in today's economy, like just focusing on time savings isn't really going to be the thing that is going to move the needle with the executive team, right? So we have to have like other things that we're looking at, and usually it's around, are there key company priorities or initiatives that this tool is kind of aligned to? The other piece is like, again, this bolting on. The days of having one specific tool that does one thing and just tacking stuff on, like that's gone. Most companies, including the ones that I'm at, like we're looking to consolidate. Mm-hmm. There's power in having a platform that can do multiple things where the data is shared, and you've got this like almost like a data lake that everyone can take advantage of. So we definitely look at that. And then the last piece is like, even if everyone's on board, the ROI looks amazing. It can consolidate a bunch of stuff into one system. If our engineering teams, our implementation teams don't have the bandwidth to support this, it's kind of a no-go. Mm-hmm. You know, so like we need to understand what their roadmap is, what the other needs of the businesses are, and then using that kind of factors in as well. And then once all those things align, it's like, all right, now this is something that would make sense, and it's definitely a more thoughtful process for sure.
Do you have some examples from your career of where everything went right, or maybe not so much?
More so on the other side, I'd say. I guess on where things have gone right, I remember at HubSpot when we ended up getting Gong early on, and that was an example. At the time, there really weren't any other tools out there that were like Gong. The ROI, the expected benefit, was huge because it wasn't just recording the calls; it was enabling the sales team and the sales leaders to better coach their teams. It was enabling the onboarding team to use that for onboarding new reps, and that was important as we were scaling up. It enabled the customer success teams to understand what was going on maybe before they got a client.
So tons of use cases for the same tool.
Right, tons of use cases. My understanding of like the engineering and the implementation resources, it wasn't that much of a lift, and so they made it relatively easy for us to get a pilot kind of up and running, and then they aligned. We were part of a pilot team, so there's 20 or so folks that were trying this thing out that had the enablement from the Gong reps. The product was frankly easy enough to use that we were able to see a bunch of quick wins right out of the gate. So that worked really well. I've also seen other examples where they're great tools. I know a bunch of folks in the current team wanted Scratchpad, and it makes data entry for CRM so much easier. But again, it's one of those things that while it solves the individual, like the individual AE's challenges, and it's great for them from an organization perspective and rolling it out beyond just one team in North America to a team globally, that's where the other pieces didn't factor in. So, yeah.
So that's an example of that, of what you were saying earlier about the data flowing back up because it wasn't fully integrated in the correct way. And then the training piece was hard to do.
Yeah, well, so the training was easy. Like Scratchpad is a great tool. It enabled the sales team, but the ROI and expected benefit piece wasn't there. It helped individual contributors and like the platform consolidation. So those two pieces, like it enabled the ICs to make sure that Salesforce was cleaning up the date and adjust stages and add their notes and all that easier. However, we still had to use the CRM. And the CRO is looking at this saying, that's great that it makes your life easier, but like we've got other things that we need to do. Updating CRM is just kind of like a core part of your job. So like we're not going to invest more money in this front because that takes away our ability to invest over here where we might be able to invest in like more insights and intelligence data that makes you more productive from a sales, hunting new prospects and things like that. So that was ultimately the decision.
Helping you stay focused on the North Star.
Exactly.
Yeah, but of course, and which of course is a great analogy because we've done the full arch or arc, depending on how you want to think about it. But because Greg, so one of the sort of the pillars that we talk about always in RevOps, it's a little different to how you say it because again, you've always come from a SaaS perspective, right? But for us, it's people, process, data, and technology, which is, again, not different, to what you were saying. We just, the product is the part that we think about differently. And again, it also depends on your go-to-market, et cetera. But, so we've now done the full arc from what starts the people getting off to the right place and then having the right alignment is what you're referring to as the North Star. But what are all these steps that have to happen from people, aligning the people, the teams, marketing, sales, and success? What are the processes in the handoff between marketing, sales, and success? What is the data flow, agreed data flow, and KPIs for each of the teams, and how do they what's the SLA for the handoff from marketing to sales to success? And only then can you really successfully implement the technology to make that all better and faster.
Yeah,
right?
Evaluate technology when you're talking about building your tech stack to support all of those other things.
Yeah, it's a good point, right? Because I see this all the time where it's like on the sales side, we might have a sales process and steps or stages in the CRM, and like having a clear and agreed upon definition of what these things are just on one team is so important, because like when you don't, what ends up happening is that you've got, if you go from discovery to demo as an example, when does that actually happen? And it may not seem like a big deal, but like what ends up happening, if people aren't aligned, then you start getting these, one rep has got an average days to close of like 100 days, whereas everyone else has got average days to close of 20 days as an example. It's like, well, why does this one rep have, why is it taking them so much longer, right? And that's just one example. Now you expand that to when sales hand something over to success, when marketing is involved, right? Like, and typically those are functions that live inside of different tools, and each team is getting better. They've implemented the tool, that they're using it. They figured out like the right kind of like playbooks, and they're making their teams more efficient with it. And then, but there are these areas of overlap where the teams meet each other, and so you need to make sure that like everyone's on board and understands like how these things work together.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're able to zoom out at the beginning and see how all this works, the ideal state, right, you got to nail down what the process is, what the definitions are, so that when you are implementing everything, it gives you the best chance to get it right as soon as possible. I'm not going to say the first time, because it's like nearly impossible to get it right the first time, but as quickly as possible.
The deal stages is a great example. I can absolutely see a team of people having totally different ideas around what does it mean when it goes from one to the other. So your example of the discovery to demo, is it when the call is completed? Is it when the demo is scheduled? All of those little granular things everybody has to agree upon. Otherwise, you're going to get those weird things with your data of like, this salesperson doesn't seem to be falling in line with what we typically see. Oh, it's because they thought you didn't move them to the demo stage until XYZ happens.
And there's broad implications about this, right? Because like, for example, a lot of AEs that I know will keep, they fundamentally like the sales pursuit is over. The prospect is maybe said, the timing is not good right now, but check back in 4 months, right? And that particular AE might leave opportunity, if you will, inside the CRM open, mm-hmm. right? Because they don't want to forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to set that next step date out 4 months, and then they're going to follow up. And so in their minds, they're like, I am working this deal to that. However, that one decision has other implications down the road, namely that like oftentimes marketing won't do their marketing emails to accounts that have open opportunities or contacts,
because they're engaged with sales.
Right. So they don't want to step on, because of the SLAs and everything that we've agreed upon, right? And so now you've got a world where this AE is left this op open, but that account's not getting the love that they should be getting that could speed them up, right? And so same thing with success. We see this all the time where between the success and renewals or sales with success, we're like, something wasn't noted, a question, a concern, an issue wasn't noted, a conversation that they had. And then because the client expressed something and it wasn't documented inside of the CRM, or the data wasn't collected properly, like that next function jumps in and the prospect or the customer is like, why you reach? I told your team this already, right? And it creates this friction with the customer. So, it makes things like renewals harder, mm-hmm. upsells harder. So yeah, absolutely. It's important to understand not only like your function, but also what are all the other teams doing, and how does your role like kind of impact all of them?
Yes. And to quote your former colleague who we talked to a few weeks ago, RevOps is the glue that holds all of these various components together. Michael Ewing had a great story about how things can go wrong when the wires get crossed between sales, marketing, and customer services, and not giving your clients a good experience.
Yeah, I mean, and we've probably all been on the other side of that as a customer somewhere, right? I know for myself, with like calling into support and getting passed around a bunch of different times, and that level of frustration that you feel as a customer. And so trying to put in place a process so that it doesn't happen is so important.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which of course gets us to where we end up pretty much every time, which is, so, what we've been talking about primarily is again, why do some businesses scale more effectively than others? And we've been talking predominantly about how do you achieve optimal internal, operating efficiency, right? And you have to be working at it every single day, because if you're adding data, or you're adding people, or you're adding revenue, things are changing. Therefore, how you align your people will change, how your processes function will change, your data is changing, and at some point, your tech will have to change, because otherwise you end up with tech bloat, which is something we talk about a fair amount too. But ultimately, when you then flip the coin around, right, which is, what is that impacting from a customer perspective? So the actual customer, not the internal customer, the external customer,
sure,
from a CX perspective, right? So,
right.
And again, this is something we learned over time by setting up these systems for our clients to really improve their internal operating efficiency, where their NPS scores started going, up and to the right. And because their customer experience was improving as they improved their internal operating efficiency. What is your take on that?
No, 100%. I mean, I remember early days at HubSpot, we had the marketing team was doing some experiments with conversions, like landing page conversions, right? And so one of the things that they had tried, maybe they still do this, I don't remember, but was putting, someone would sign up for like a white paper or a webinar or something like that, an ebook, and on the thank you page, they would put another form for if you're interested to get a demo, right? And so what would happen is that prospect that was signing up for something about marketing automation or social media marketing, fill out the initial landing page form, would get put onto this thank you page form. They wouldn't see the content. It was emailed to them, or they could click to download it. Maybe they got distracted or something, and they would come back, and then they would see, on that same thank you page, a different form for a demo. And in their eyes, they're like, well, I didn't get the thing that I'd signed up for. So they fill out the form again, right? So marketing's like, great, we got all these demos that are coming in. This is fantastic. And then inside of CRM, like the AEs were getting these demo requests. Those were like the most valuable leads that you could get. So everyone was thrilled to get them. And so they started, following up. Hey, I saw you requested a demo. Let's schedule a time. And then they get on the phone with these people. And the person's like, I didn't request a demo. I was trying to get this other thing. And just create, so it's like that one simple test, like sure, boosted conversions for a little while, but like that created a point of friction. And the customer now has this feeling of like, do they not, this is HubSpot. How do they not know what I've signed up for? You see that like kind of similar examples play out across the different like areas of overlap. So that's, sales and marketing. See the same thing with like CS or sales and like product, if you will, once you have a customer, and like usage. If you don't understand, if the usage data isn't fed back to the teams the right way, then you've got sales or customer success reaching out as a potential like upgrade, but they're actually having problems using your product or service.
Yes.
And like, why are you reaching out to me? Like, I'm clearly not happy.
That's the Michael Ewing example.
And then the sales and CS person is like traumatized by this. And like, so it's like, anytime you have these points, these kind of situations, like there's the impact on the customer, which like they don't feel good about the brand and who they're working with. And like, they want more out of their partners, right? But then internally, the rep or the AE or whoever it is, if that happens a couple times, now they suddenly are like, I'm not doing this again. I'm going to wait, see what other people are doing. And that's why you need to have that feedback loop in there, because otherwise no one
because everyone's
knows.
experience is so much better if they do have that information, and then they're proactively reaching out and saying, look, I understand you're having issues with XYZ, and we're actually rolling out this new feature that I think is going to resolve a lot of your issues. Let me walk you through that. And then it's like, oh.
Exactly. Right. I so many AEs that in companies that I know that have gone from like a purely AEs doing net new sales to doing some level of like customer selling at some point. Initially, it's hard to get them to do it because they don't want to call somebody and then be looped into these support issues. They don't know, they're not the experts, and it's kind of like scary for them. So you have to build up this like, you can do it, go get it, and like we do that by giving them the data to say, hey, look, you're not calling everybody, you're calling the ones that we know have the highest likelihood to be successful with this other product, that are the best fit, and probably aren't in a bad place where all they need is help, right? And so those ones we're going to give to the success team or whoever. But yeah, it's if you can arm the team the right way, it makes everything else flow better.
Yes. Great case for using data as an asset, for sure.
Yes. The other thing is about data being an asset is like, I think companies have so much data, but I don't think everybody understands truly how much of an asset it is. And so they don't treat it like it's anything. And so they don't capture it, they don't bucket it correctly because they don't understand how it's used by other teams, departments, and the higher ups. Ideally, there's like a company is almost like an engine, and so someone like an engineer can be standing at the controls and be looking at all the different dials and gauges and see how things are working. I think about like my car, like the engine temperature, it's got this range, right? And you kind of know when the temperatures are within range. And then if it spikes out of range, then it's like, okay, there's an issue there. I can dig deeper. And that's like kind of the ideal state, is anyone can look at this dashboard and see how the different functions are working and then be able to spot the anomalies. And that's how you maintain kind of like a smooth operating engine, if you will.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Folks who've listened to a number of episodes are probably sick of this analogy, but I really love it. Is, the first time you ever walked into a jet and you looked, you got up to the top and you looked left into the cockpit, and it's like, I remember as a kid, I don't know if I was 11 or whatever, and I look into this cockpit, I'm like, oh my gosh, how do these pilots know which of those little buttons or knobs to pull or push or whatever? And of course, I guess a few years ago, I learned that, pilots, and this is maybe a bit of a generalization, they're only thinking about 3 KPIs or indicators at any one time, right? This is once they're, flying. It's velocity, direction, and altitude. And so those are the 3 most prominent dials, on any airplane. And only if one of those is off, to the example you gave now, of the oil temperature or whatever it is, then they can start digging down into, okay, well, we're off track, or our velocity is dropping, or, whatever there's a problem with our heading. Then they can start digging down into that panel of, knobs and levers to pull to correct things. But for the rest of the time, all they're doing is those 3 things: velocity check, direction check, altitude check,
Right. It helps with the issue diagnosis, right? Like if everything is kind of working correctly, and then you notice something is not working, then it's like, okay, and then you can kind of go through those steps to diagnose the issues and get it fixed. But like if everything is chaotic, then like you just don't know, is this really the issue, or is there something else behind it? And when you have, I won't say like bad data, but just like data isn't necessarily accurate or whatever the case may be, then like you have no idea. And so you can't, and you can't figure it out, and you can't model it out to say like, well, if I make this change, will this actually have the impact that I want it to have?
Yeah.
And you just kind of go in, you're flying blind essentially.
Yeah.
So that's why it's so important that everybody understands like the value of the data that they're collecting, and put it into the systems correctly, and then understand how everyone's using it, because everybody has an impact in the organization.
Yeah. But it's interesting though, because this is one of the areas where, again, you have to solve, like in our case, when we're doing an implementation, we have to be able to solve for the data in addition to the process and the alignment of teams before we can really set up the technology successfully.
So what do you mean by that? You have to solve for the data?
Well, So what we often find is if we're working with a client, they're not completely clear about what data marketing is responsible for, or what data sales is responsible for, or what data success is responsible for. On the marketing front, they're typically tracking too many different data points. To the example you just gave, they're not tracking the 3 most important leading indicators, and then digging down. If one of those is off, then they can go down to the next set of indicators. And the same thing with in sales, it's typically a little easier to figure out what your KPIs are. And then, of course, if one of them is off, then you go down to the next level of, well, what are the activities that are impacting those KPIs? And is there something we can do differently with those activities to get the numbers back up? And again, that's because that's part of the process. And then, so you go one step further back again as well. If the data is not clear, in other words, the KPIs are not clear amongst the individuals on the team or the total team, then there might be an issue with the process. So then you go back to the process and say, okay, so let's just see where's the issue. And of course, ultimately, if you reverse engineer the whole thing, then ultimately there might be a people issue, which could be, again, a myriad of different things. But you always start with, the data, the process, and
no, we think about it the same way.
Yeah.
But you need that kind of like starting point so you can diagnose all the way down to make the correct assessment. Because I'm sure there are cases where like the determination is it's a people thing when it's actually not a people thing. It's a process
exactly.
thing. And that has a huge impact on that person's life, right? So being able to understand how it kind of like it should all work, like that macro view, and have everyone be agreed upon, and make sure everyone's aligned to like their role in making sure this all works, goes to getting this like engine that's finely tuned.
Yeah.
And you can also like kind of predict where it's going to go. Like the best companies out there, like their ability to forecast is amazing, but it's because they've fine-tuned the data, they've fine-tuned the process, they've fine-tuned the people, that they're able to figure out like, if I pull this lever, I think we can get this type of result, and so I'm going to put this into the forecast.
Yeah. And it probably comes back to where we started, where in fact one of the very first things that you said was, I think it really comes back to your words were how change happens. And it's because, again, none of these things, the process is going to change. The process is iterative, whether it's a marketing process, a sales process, a success process, or anywhere else in the business. The process will change as you're adding people, as you're adding data, as you're adding technology. So it's also a matter of going in with that expectation that, okay, this is the process today, but it might change next week, next month, next quarter, and somebody needs to be, which is the superheroes you talked about in RevOps. They're the ones that are tracking that, and they're bringing that back to whomever to say, okay, so this process in marketing or between success and marketing now needs to change because we've added 3 people in customer success and we've added 2 people in marketing, and sales is killing it. We need to make some changes. And here's the data to show why. And here are some tools we could consider to make that a little easier. But it's this continuous improvement that we all know about and we all talk about, but doing it is a little trickier.
Yes, it's you're absolutely right, because it's like almost like this virtuous cycle, right? Of growth in one area leads to more people, tools, whatever, that leads to, right, and it circles all the way around. But yeah, you're spot on that it all kind of circles around, but you can't skip any of the steps, because as soon as you skip one of those steps, that's where things really start
unravel,
to break down. Yeah.
Well, no, Amy definitely loves. Well, actually, the way the two of you put this together, Greg, you said harmonious, and then which of course is one of Amy's favorite words, and then
my number 2 strength, harmony.
And then Amy added well-oiled machine, and I think those two really capture this really well. Is what you're striving for is harmony across all these different factors, right? People, process, data, and technology, so that you can have a well-oiled machine, but ultimately so that you can create the greatest customer experience, which of course is harmony and harmonious once again.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is all meant to be.
Did you enjoy this episode?
Find more at RevOpsChampions.com.